In this video, we're going to talk about sex positivity. But first, a caveat. In the research on positive psychology, there is no positive psychology of human sexuality. Sex research mostly focuses on negative aspects and negative variables, such as risk associated with sex, harm, and stigma. It is worth asking ourselves why that is, and if we truly are living in a sex positive culture. We do know from a lot of research that negative stigma impacts behavior and well being. And this is not just in terms of sex and relationships, but in lots of domains that are social. And socially conservative attitudes towards sex, including anti sex and abstinence focused sex education, are associated with decreased sexual pleasure and satisfaction. When I prompt my students to think about whether we truly are living in a sex positive culture, I ask them whether they think it's okay for people to, for instance, have sex in public, talk to children about sex, fire employees for being promiscuous, have non monogamous relationships, and pay for sex. The question is not about the legal status of these things. Many of these things are not legal, but the question is whether we'd be okay with them in society. The question is more about our psychological attitudes. And in response to many of these questions, a lot of people are against the expressions of sex, even when they're consensual, because they think they're not good for society or at large. I took this clip from The Psychology of Human Sexuality by my friend and colleague Dr. Justin Lee Miller on what it means to be sex positive. So, sex positivity could mean adopting comprehensive and inclusive definitions of gender and sexual orientation, rejecting narrow definitions about what constitutes sex, giving due consideration to both potential positive and negative aspects of sexual activity, providing students with information and tools they need to optimize their sexual health and make healthy decisions, promoting healthy and respectful sexual and romantic relationships, recognizing that monogamy and marriage are not universal relationship goals and ideals, understanding that not everyone is a sexual being and that lack of sexual desire is not inherently dysfunctional, and respecting people who have different views about sex. In terms of what a sex positive culture would look like, I personally think that this would include having open and honest discussions about sex for all ages and all contexts, treating sex as normal and healthy and not something inherently shameful or sinful, and having tolerance for all varieties of consensual sexual behavior. I would also suggest promoting a concept of sexual anti fragility, and this would include encouraging healthy sexual practices. In other words, the recognition that sex is beneficial, and this is in contrast to safetyism, which is a method of ostensibly protecting young people from negative outcomes by discouraging sex, but this often leads to worse outcomes, and we can see it in some of the international data. There's a stark contrast between the sex positive cultures of Scandinavian countries compared to the US. Most Dutch parents practice what they call vigilance leniency, in which they have a strong familial bond and are open to letting their children make their own decisions. Many Dutch adolescents are sexually active, and their parents are okay with this. In fact, Dutch parents understand that their teenagers are having sex, and they don't try to stop it. And this difference in approaches toward teenage sex results in more positive outcomes in Scandinavian societies. They have higher rates of contraception use and lower rates of sexually transmitted diseases, teen pregnancies, and abortions compared to the United States. And this is not unique to Northern Europe. In the Maurya culture of India, adolescents have access to dormitories called gotels, in which teenagers are encouraged to have multiple sex partners. They're encouraged to sexually experiment because it's considered unwise to become attached to a single partner until they've learned about sex and sexual preferences. There's also a strong emphasis on gender equality in terms of sexual experimentation and mate choice. Here's a quote from an article on this topic. The Gotel is a place where young adults are trained to overcome attachments, jealousies, and possessiveness. It helps in the emotional growth of the young people. It also binds their society together and helps the Maria boys and girls to grow up in a kind of group discipline. The existence of the Gotel is the reason why there are hardly any crimes committed due to jealousy. It's interesting to think how this type of practice would look like in American society, and it's interesting to consider all the ways in which we can improve on our culture to be more and more sex positive, like some of the other cultures throughout the world.